Konnichiwa, this is the Shogunstein, and this is a video of games that I would recommend if you're really into the new miniseries on the Hulu flicks, the Shogun. So Shogun is on the Hulu flicks right now, and it's based on James Clavell's book Shogun. It's also a remake because there was a miniseries in the late 1970s, early 1980s with Richard Chamberlain, also based on the book. And it's also excellent miniseries. And maybe in a future video, I'll talk about what I felt some of the differences between the two series were. But James Clavell is a very famous author who wrote a number of books that are later grouped into something that are called the Ieyasu saga. I don't know if when he originally wrote them, that was the intent. But there are several books in this series, and they include Shogun, which is the story of Toranaga and who is the guy who's supposed to be Blackthorn, who is supposed to be Will Adams. And there is also Taipan, which is the story of sort of after the Opium War and Hong Kong. There's Noble House, which is Hong Kong, after, many years after the events in Taipan. So those are the three most famous books in that Asia series. He wrote a book before he died called Gaijin, which is supposed to be about Japan around the time of the Meiji Restoration. That was a book that I just didn't like as much as I loved Shogun and Taipan and Noble House. And there's also one that deals with the situation in Iran where the Islamic Republic took power with the Ayatollah, so sort of the fall of the Shah and the rise of the Ayatollah in Iran, called Whirlwind. And they were kind of connected now. If you go to the bookstore and buy the Clavell books, they're all part of what they call the Ieyasu saga. Again, I don't know when they were originally written, if that was his intent. There are some characters that carry over between the books. So in Shogun, the book, and in both versions of the miniseries, you're dealing with the unification of Japan, and the main Japanese character is Toranaga, who is supposed to be Tokugawa Ieyasu. And Blackthorn is Will Adams, and Will Adams, the interpreter. She's supposed to be the daughter of the guy who assassinated Oda Nobunaga, and they're dealing with Osaka Castle, where the heir to Toyotomi Hideyoshi's regime is living. That's basically the end of the Sengoku period that is covered in Shogun. So Japan traditionally had been ruled by an emperor, and the emperor lost power, and then you had the shogun in charge, but for a long time there was no daimyo strong enough to be shogun. And then from like 1300 to 1600 you had this period called the Sengoku period, where the various daimyos, the powerful daimyos, were kind of battling it out for who was going to be the shogun. In the end, you have Oda Nobunaga, who nearly unified Japan, but he is assassinated by one of his own people. And again, the main female character in Shogun is supposed to be the daughter of the guy who helped assassinate Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga was followed by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi nearly unified Japan, but he's never fully accepted because he was not born a daimyo. He was born a peasant. He fought a disastrous war in Korea, and he had that Osaka Castle, that amazing castle built. When he died, he asked the other powerful daimyo to sort of watch over his son until the son could take over. But unfortunately, that is not what happened. And you're going to have maneuvering between some of the daimyo led by Tokugawa Ieyasu, who will eventually fight the battle of Sekigahara and gain control of Japan, and his family will rule Japan until about 1868, when the Meiji Restoration. And those chain events are set in motion in 1853, when the Americans, Commodore Perry, showed up and opened Japan, Treaty of Kanagawa. So Shogun is a fictional version with a lot of history of the Tokugawa story, Tokugawa Ieyasu. So again, in the book, he's Toranaga. So right now on the Hulu flicks, it's like the biggest thing. People are loving the new Shogun series. In the original miniseries, Toranaga was played by a very famous Japanese actor who starred in all those very famous samurai movies. Now he's played by the guy. You've seen him in a lot of movies. Maybe most recently he was in John Wick 4, and he was sort of the head of the hotel that was, I think, was in Osaka also in the beginning of the movie. He was also in Bullet Train. And I'll talk about the difference between both of those miniseries in a later video. So if you're into Shogun and you're a board gamer, I got some recommendations for you. Two that I don't have because I've never played the game is one, there is a new version of that Unmatched series. I don't really play restoration games, but a lot of people like the Unmatched. And one of the newest ones you can play is Oda Nobunaga, who's one of the three people who leads to the unification of Japan. And there is a board game about Sekigahara, which is the battle where in the end Tokugawa Ieyasu wins and is going to unify Japan. It's at the end of the book, Shogun. I'm not sure how they'll deal with it in the new series. So again, Toranaga, if you're watching the miniseries, it's going to end or it's leading to Sekigahara. And there is a board game about Sekigahara. I haven't played it, so I can't really comment on it. But let me talk about some games I have played and some recommendations. So if you're into the Shogun and you want some board games, maybe want to have a game night that's sort of Shogun related, here are some of my recommendations. Okay, now this is not going to be popular with the Wake people, but East India Companies is not directly about Japan, but is about the trade that is going on that is a big part of the story in Shogun. So if you're watching in Shogun, Blackthorn, Will Adams, is English, and he's actually, I think, on a Dutch ship, and they're Protestant countries, and they're looking to trade in Japan, and they're rivaled by the Jesuits from Portugal, the Portuguese, the Catholics. So there's a big element of trade and religion and the age of exploration that's part of the Shogun story and is an important part of the politics in the book. Again, the book, I think, does a great job of giving that history. The original miniseries, I thought also, the newer one, again, maybe for a later video, the newer one I felt, if you didn't know some of this history, maybe be a little confusing. But East India Companies is a great game, and it's a very good economic game with this theme of trading in Asia with the British East India Companies. This is not a defense of colonialism or some of the negative effects of the East India Company and that trade. But if you like the Shogun and you kind of want to understand what's going on, you got to understand what was going on in terms of trade in Asia, between, again, the different countries in Europe and the whole Catholic Protestant thing. Again, in 1853, the Americans will show up in Japan and force them to open because Will Adams kind of explained, and certainly in the book, Blackthorn explains to Toranaga what's going on in the world. And he, kind of talks about what happens in Macau and in China with trade and imperialism. And that's one of the first things Tokugawa does, or Toranaga does when he unifies Japan, is he closes it. He isolates Japan and he kicks out those missionaries. He kicks out the Portuguese. So if you want to understand, again, this is not a defense of colonialism or imperialism, but if you want to understand what is going on economically with Japan and China and Macau, this is a great game for it. It's very thematic. And again, you can't understand what's going on if you try to erase that history. So East India Companies is a good game if you want to kind of get a feel for that economic stuff that is going on. It's not necessarily directly a Japanese themed game in any stretch, but you'll get an idea of commercially what was going on and what some of the interests were. Okay, now to focus more on Japan, a couple of games I'm going to recommend. One is a little Kickstarter game. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it was fun with good art. One, it's called Martial Art. Basically, it's war. It's game of classic, war with cool Japanese art from the period, and it's a good filler game. Nothing. You don't have to be Oppenheimer to figure this out, but it's just a good little quick game if you like war, you like simple card game with cool Japanese art from this time period. This was a little Kickstarter, and I don't know if it got a lot of traction, I don't know how many people backed it, but I enjoyed it, and it's a good little game. Next game is a dexterity game. So you're going to see in Shogun, there are various assassination attempts, ninjas and assassins. And the castles that they built in Japan at this time very often had these floors that they called nightingale floors that had like a whistling sound, because if an assassin was coming in and they walked on the floor, it kind of like an alarm. It kind of had like a whistling sound. So that's kind of the theme of this game. It's a dexterity game, and you are balancing. You're going from, castle to castle, you're going from building to building, and you're trying to, get from one path to the other without your stuff tumbling over. So again, it's not an overly complicated game. It's just probably more filler, but it's a good dexterity game. And again, that's an important part, some of the better parts of the Shogun book, and certainly in this new version of the miniseries, they had a really cool scene where an assassin did try to kill Blackthorn, Will Adams. So you get an idea of how all that worked. So if you like dexterity and you like Japanese themed games, and again, it is historical, those castles did have those whistling floors. Check out Floating Floors. Fun game, and it's different, and it's very hands-on. It is a dexterity game. Very challenging, but fun and easy play. Another filler game that I recommend is a game called Ohanami. It's it deals with flowers and trees, and trying to have rows with consecutive numbers. Again, not a overly complicated game. Very peaceful, relaxing, kind of Zenish theme, but great filler, and very competitive. You got to have a lot of math because you got to add up a lot of things. But good game with a nice Japanese nature theme. Very good for in between games, or maybe you need a quick game after dinner or before going to bed. Very relaxing theme. And again, it's basically you're putting numbers, cards, various different trees and flowers, and you got trying to get numbers in as close to order as possible. So check out Oinama. One of my favorite Japanese themed games is 100 Torii. And then they also recently had some expansions to add to the 100 Torii. Torii, and you'll see this symbol. If you watch the either series, you're going to see this. This is a Torii gate. This is a gate that means what you're entering is Shinto. It's a Shinto religious area. Shinto is Japan's native religion. So again, if you're watching Shogun, you're going to see the Portuguese trying to convert people to Catholicism. Buddhism, that originally from India, goes through Korea, gets to Japan. There were Buddhists in Japan. And Nobunaga, part of that backstory of why, the female character's father turned on Nobunaga, he was brutal to the Buddhist monks in Japan. So again, there's a lot of these questions about, what themes are appropriate or not. So again, there's an Oda Nobunaga game that just came out. I think it's a great theme. I think he's an interesting guy, but he was brutal to the Buddhists. So yeah, Buddhism, you do have some Confucianism, you have Zen, but Shinto is the Japanese native religion. It's an animistic religion. And in this game, it's a tile-laying game, a little bit like Carsacon, a little bit where you're trying to go through as many gates as possible. And it's just a wonderful game. Setup is a bit much, so just be aware that there's a lot of things to set up. But it's really a lot of fun, and you're trying to go through you're trying to cut a path and go through as many gates as possible. And then they recently added several little mini expansions to it that give it a couple little things without making it overcomplicated. Sometimes, an expansion is a cash grab, not in this case. And there were small expansions that do a couple of little things that really add some flavor to the game. So if you're interested in a fun game that's different, this theme of Shinto and laying the tiles, and along the way, you meet people who are going to help you. This is a great game, and then the expansions. The last game I'm going to show takes place, obviously, after the events of Shogun. We're big fans here of Ticket to Ride. We recently just finished the Ticket to Ride Legacy game. But this is a newer map as well. This is where you're using the Shinkansen, better known as the bullet train. And you got a Japanese map for this, so you're dealing with Japanese locations. So this is good for Japanese geography. And again, it's not the time period of Shogun, but if you're into this sort of Japan theme and you want a game that's very competitive, it's a very close game. So the scoring on this one is very close. It's not as big and as vast as regular Ticket to Ride. You're gonna need, now if you get this, you need to have a base game to mix with this. This is an expansion. You can't play it on its own. You need things from the base. But it is really fun to use the mechanic of the Shinkansen, because those are shared routes, and then you get to know that Japanese geography is interesting too. So you really do get a good lesson in Japanese geography. Now, so these are just some games that I'm recommending that if you're into the Shogun. So if you've been watching the series again, I say read the book. That's the first thing I'd say. If you haven't read the book, this is one of the best books of all time. If you haven't figured out, the name of this channel comes from how much I love this book. So that would be the first thing I do. If you haven't read Shogun, read Shogun. And again, if you've also only watched the Hulu Flicks version, check out the original one with Richard Chamberlain. So again, these are just some games that I recommend with a nice Japanese theme, that if you're into Shogun and you want to have like a game night that's reflective of that Japanese theme. And none of these games, maybe East India Company's is the most complex of them. But mostly, again, the Ticket to Ride plays mostly like regular Ticket to Ride, with some of the changes being that Shinkansen mechanism of the shared trains. Other than that, if you know how to play Ticket to Ride, you'll be fine with this. Ohanami, you can learn very quickly how to play this. Again, it's really just filler. Floating Floors has very good directions. There's a lot of good videos from my friends at Meeple University explaining how to play. Good dexterity game with that Japanese theme. Martial art, if you know how to play war, you'll know how to play this. Simple enough. 100 Torii, check out some of my videos on how to play and how to play the expansions. Really great game if you can find it. We had picked this up on Kickstarter. Just to be transparent, Pencil First Games did send us the expansions for review purposes. So while I did back this on Kickstarter, the expansions they did send to me. And then finally, East India Companies, if you kind of want to know some of that historic economic background of what was going on, why Europeans and eventually the Americans were so interested in trade with Asia. And this is a really good game. You just got to maybe turn off that, as my friend Board Game Bullocks calls that nasty little website, and actually just play the game and just ignore some of the wake people on this game. Because some of those same people who are mad at this game are loving the Oda Nobunaga game. And Oda Nobunaga, very interesting person historically, but if you look at what he did, very brutal guy. So why East India Company is any worse than Oda Nobunaga, that's one of the things I don't understand about board gaming. But if you want to understand what's going on, you got to understand the economic history that's going on as well. Anyway, check out the miniseries, read the book, check out some of these games. This is the Shogunstein out.